What's up, peeps? I want to take a few moments today to talk to you about the future of websites, and more specifically, the future of WordPress and e-commerce. The reason I wanted to do this is because I don't think people are aware of what exactly is happening out there and how quickly we are approaching a very serious situation with people's websites. Sort of a make or break moment where things are going to cease working, they're going to stop working, and people are going to have to make a lot of changes. But in the process, a lot is going to be lost. So people are running right into a situation where they're going to lose a lot of things that are currently important to them, or they're going to have to they're going to be forced to make some changes, but what they're going to find is they're not going to be able to make those changes. There's a couple of reasons for that. They're going to be too expensive and frankly going to be too difficult for anyone to manage some of these challenges that everyone's going to be facing. But the bottom line with WordPress is that, and what we're facing and the reason there's a problem is it's actually a result of the open source software system, and how open source software has not necessarily been a lie, but it has been a learning journey, and it has not quite worked out the way we thought. And now some things are going to be necessary. So some changes are going to be necessary within open source communities, open source software communities, if those ecosystems are going to continue to grow. And I'm not bullish on this. I actually think they're going to die. I think the public is going to, it's going to fall out of favor with the public. The public will disfavor these types of systems and will instead opt for more purpose-built paid solutions. It's neither here nor there right now, though. Let's talk about what's wrong with the WordPress architecture. Okay, so I've got some pathetic props out here because I'm sitting out by my pool. But let's say we've got this koozie here represents WordPress. Okay, and WordPress this is the core of WordPress, the main code that represents what WordPress is and what it does. It's basic. It doesn't do e-commerce, doesn't do any of this stuff. It's just the guts, like allow you to make some content, have some users on your site, that kind of thing. So here's WordPress. WordPress has two components associated with it that make it what it is. The first one of those is themes. Okay, we got themes. So let's put this right here. So themes on this side, and the other component that we're all familiar with is plugins over here. So you got plugins, themes, and WordPress. And the way it has worked, WordPress has said, okay, we're going to be hands off on the themes and plugins. We're not going to deal with that. We're just going to keep improving the core. And then other developers, third-party developers, are going to be responsible for developing and improving themes and plugins. As the community was forming and things were coming into focus, over 15 years ago, this was a great system because it allowed people to experiment with as many different things as possible, as quickly as possible. So I think in terms of figuring out what we might want to do, this is a very effective strategy. This is a good way to set up an ecosystem to kind of figure out, okay, infinite possibilities exist, but people who use this really only want this, and this. There's a smaller subset of features that people are really drawn to, and then this morass of functionality, all this other stuff that's ever been created, most of it kind of just dissipates into noise. But a few things stick around as parts of the canon, like essential things that we think we need in this website environment. And so that's sort of happened with themes and plugins, if you think about it. Like if you hear about WordPress themes now, there's been millions produced over the years, but you're probably only familiar with 3 or 4, or would only ever consider 3 or 4 for your next purchase, because what's happened is a few have come to dominate the market, and all the other millions that existed before simply just don't matter. They weren't high enough quality, didn't have enough marketing behind them. There's 101 reasons why these things either gain favor or fall by the wayside. Now with plugins, the situation has been the same. Certain functionality is really critical. SEO type stuff's been important for many years. Security has always had a place, although a little bit dubious in my opinion. But there's a suite of plugins that really do important stuff, and those have a lot of favor. But really, the other millions, like I said, just like the themes, they don't really matter. And it has emerged over the last few years that the most important subset of plugins by far is e-commerce plugins. This should not be a surprise to anybody. Building any type of website, running any type of website over time requires money. So that means you're either losing money over time, or you have to figure out a way to generate some revenue from your website to offset those costs. Or in the case of a good internet business, a way to actually make a profit from your website. So the growth of the last, we'll just say 7-8 years. The growth of the last 7 or 8 years has created a lot more opportunities for people to pay for stuff to go with their site. Paying for email campaign marketing, that kind of thing, like a ConvertKit or something like this, email campaign provider. Paying for e-commerce plugins, paying for certain additional functionality that goes with e-commerce, such as recurring subscriptions, selling membership type stuff. We've had the rise of LMS, learning management systems, which is like courses, all of that stuff, online coaching, all these things, all these trends that have emerged sort of have software components associated with them, and these have risen to the top as the things that people need. But what has happened is there's so many of them now that it costs, each one of these components represents a subscription type cost for the website owner, and at the end of the year they might look back at this and say, well, we're running 8 subscriptions to run this site and it costs X amount of dollars per year. We need to reduce this cost by 40%, so we're going to get rid of these other pieces. And this process has played out for a few years now, where people are down to their minimum viable suite of stuff they need, components they need and actually pay for. And that's where people are at now. So they've kind of gotten fatigued about dealing with all these different components and all this different technical stuff. And so now there's been it's kind of maybe for a couple years now, there's been sort of a, if not an outright contraction, at least people looking in the direction like, oh, I need to downsize a little bit, really get my core, the core software that I need to run my business, got to get that tight, got to get that right. And we can move on from there. There's been a need to cut the fat. And I think we've seen this in all aspects of society over the last couple of years. And I just kind of took this for granted because I've been operating in the space for so long. But it's like the existence of these themes and plugins, we just kind of take it for granted that that's the way the ecosystem works. But I spent the last 2 months, I run my own e-commerce websites, and I spent the last 2 months working with other people's e-commerce websites to try and get a really good feel for what is happening out there right now. Like, what is the average person's e-commerce needs? What are they going to have to go through to have a successful website? What kind of annual costs are they going to be looking at? How many different components are they going to have to be dealing with to run their site? How much complexity do they have to navigate and deal with? And can I make that simpler for them? Are there efficiencies to be gained here? So I've been trying to figure those things out. And the thing that's actually stood out the most is not anything particular for any one person I'm trying to help, but the disease that's affecting the entire WordPress ecosystem has now become incredibly clear. And unfortunately for everyone using WordPress, myself included, the problem is a fundamental problem of system design. And I can't believe I didn't fully see this and understand this until now, but here it is. The fact that WordPress is open source software and says, we're not going to touch these plugins, they're open source, and these themes are open source. You guys figure all that stuff out. We don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to do that. You guys figure all that out. But what this means for end users of websites, especially for e-commerce, is that the plugins you use and your theme, which is your design and some other stuff, they must play nice. They must be integrated. Integrations are where all the costs are for you, the end user. Like if, let's say the components you buy, the software components, I use MemberPress. The cheapest MemberPress is like $180 per year, right? So we tend to think about these types of costs as the costs we will be paying. The grim reality is whatever MemberPress costs is a drop in the bucket. It doesn't even matter. I don't care what the price tag of MemberPress is. The cost of MemberPress and the cost of any other e-commerce plugin is integration. And the cost is only determined by the complexity of your current operating environment and how much crap needs to be integrated. So it's a problem. It's a huge problem. So the cost is not in the components, it's in the integrations, the trouble, the headaches, the future problems. Everything that sucks about your experience is a product of the integrations and only a second order consequence of the actual components themselves. Like, we like to debate like, oh, this theme is good, this theme is bad, this plugin is good, this plugin is bad. I got news for you. When you got to integrate the two together, it all sucks. It all sucks. And these integrations are untenable. And so what's happened with e-commerce plugins is funny to see. They used to have it so they initially came out and it was hard to integrate with your themes and all that stuff. So they introduced their own themes that had full integrations. But what they found out is people people weren't really actively choosing to use those because they already had a pre-existing site, maybe already had some pre-existing e-commerce stuff. They have a pre-existing design. The design was integrated with a different theme or with a custom theme or was just done differently. They don't want to shed all of all these other sunk costs that they put in their site to get it where it is. They just want to integrate e-commerce. So this seems like a very natural, straightforward type of thing to do with your site. You know, oh, I just want to add an e-commerce component. I've already got my design. I've already got my custom design. I don't want to deal with that. But the reality is your integration is only as good as the components you're integrating and however competent the integration itself is. And so when your components are bad, regardless of how much sunk cost you've got in them, your integration, most integrations in the WordPress space are trash. Oh man, we don't have time to go into the problems here, but they're horrible. And all the cost is actually sitting right there. It's not the component cost, it's the integration cost. And so these companies, they release their own, the e-commerce plugin companies, they release their own themes to try and do this. Those were not received very well because they don't really fit where people are. And then they tried to provide all of these like done for you template components and design components, but people were annoyed because on the pages where these components showed up, like checkout pages or product purchase pages or user account pages, things like that, bits of the design were different. Like the input forms look different, the buttons look different, the overall design, it doesn't match. Like the e-com integration doesn't match precisely, you know, your larger design. So that sucks. Site owners get to that and they're bummed. Well then, let's say some of them are intrepid and they will try to get whatever outcome they want. They pay for this outcome, they do this full integration, and then they have a never-ending campaign of responsive design issues, little things in integrations that are broken, these warts that pop up here and there because the system's just not put together right. There's all these problems, all associated with integrations. And so what these e-com companies are doing now is providing fully skinned account areas and checkout pages and things like that. Well, when the stuff that was only halfway integrated in your design, when that wasn't well received, they chose to do this because at least they could get their account pages working. Yeah, granted, the user signs into your site, goes to their account page. Now this account page looks nothing like your site. Nothing like it. It looks like the admin backend for MemberPress or whatever you're using, okay? It looks totally different than the rest of your site. Well, what I found is that small-time operators maybe will accept this, but like anyone doing real business, and I'm talking anyone doing more than $10,000 in receipts per year, hates this. Universally, they're like, this seems not ideal. I would like for these accounts features and everything like this to be integrated into my design. I want these pages to have my branding. I want all this stuff to be reinforced. I want to display this. I don't want to display that. And with these plugins, like we were never gonna have every option we want to make these things fit our precise circumstances. It's not gonna happen. But these plugin companies, they have revenue to generate, so they have to keep trying, right? But I realize now, and this is the point I kind of set up earlier, I realize now, after working with all these sites recently and also my own, I realize now that this goal of a clean integration, it's never gonna happen with WordPress. It cannot happen with WordPress. Structurally, the way WordPress works, it is impossible. Here's how an open source system must work, an open source ecosystem must work in order for the growth that happens over time, the emergence of new must-have type features, and the integration of those things, how to reduce that integration cost to nothing or next to nothing. The only way this is ever gonna work, it's ugly. Here it is. The only way this is ever gonna work is if the main open source component becomes cannibalistic. It must eat the highest flying themes and plugins associated with it. Now I have some specific thoughts about how the theme part of this should be done. I really think there should only be one theme with infinite sub-variations of that theme, which is a different approach from anything we've seen to date. I'm not even sure people can really imagine what I just said, but we'll leave that aside for now. We're not gonna worry about that. The plugin situation, also very, very intriguing. The core needs to subsume a lot of the functionality of these high-flying plugins. But what has happened with WordPress is sort of this promise of community, right? And So these plugin developers have been responsible for their own territory all this time. But the real proper solution for WordPress as the primary open source component of this entire system is to survey the landscape, identify the pieces that are must-have pieces, absolutely must-have core functionality things that people want from the platform. And now it's clear this is e-commerce. No one in 2023 is justified in starting a real website without an e-commerce component. You must be trying to do some business activity that generates money. It can just be building a list and you can generate your money elsewhere. But it's some activity that leads towards business growth or audience growth or things like that, things that are adjacent to business success. E-commerce certainly being the most glaring of these items. So what WordPress or any open source core component must do is look at the finest performing, most critical elements of its add-on ecosystem, and it must eat them. It must eat them. Sounds so harsh. You've got your best orbiter businesses around your model. And in order to preserve your growth and to preserve your ecosystem and to make it work better for everyone who uses it over time, you actually have to eat the top performers. I need you to think about this for a second. I really need you to think about this and like absorb it. Because if you've been around WordPress as long as I have, I've been around since 2005, so I go way back. But the entire ecosystem has been built and it's been built and marketed as this thing that's open to everyone. It's been marketed with this idea of openness, this idea of inclusion, and this idea of anyone can play and be successful. And so obviously, if the best way to run an open source system over time is to have your main component, your main core piece, eat the most important add-on pieces that get developed, there's not a lot of community and goodwill in that. You can't advertise this. You really can't even talk about this. This is awful. Sounds awful. But indeed, if you really think this through, you will see that the only way to tighten up integrations is for the core to consume these components and to also include the integrations in this package, or else the integrations will invariably be left to the endpoint nodes, and endpoint nodes in this case is you, anybody, you, me, anyone else running a WordPress site. If the integration is mostly left up to the endpoint nodes, that means the bulk of the cost, the bulk of the tough to solve technical problems, the bulk of these wading through crap and nonsense and wading through other components that have committed sins. And all these sins are being committed on these same websites. And the integrations have to work to try and resolve as many of these sins as possible in order for the integrations to be as good as possible. That's the only thing that's going to happen if the integrations are left up to the third parties, left up to the endpoint nodes. So they must be consumed by the core. The core must be responsible for these integrations, and it's a much slower growth process than what WordPress has given us over the past 18, 20 years. And so now that I know this, now that I see this, I can't unsee it. There's no going back. Open source software, and I have mixed feelings about this. I've been in this world, like I said, 18 years now. I like the promise of a lot of it. I do. And anyone who knows me knows I'm kind of the villain of WordPress. So I think they've not navigated everything the best way through the years. But I think ultimately every bit of discontent now I see is related to this idea that the core has ceded responsibility to third-party components. Over time, some of these third-party components have emerged as being far more important than a lot of stuff that exists in core. But since these third-party components can never be consumed by the core, unless WordPress wants to go back on everything it's ever said and change the entire ecosystem and their core software, which I doubt is going to happen, this problem can never be solved with WordPress. And so if you're really paying attention and you understand what I'm saying, then you know that the future is going to include some sort of website software platform that is not WordPress. And I promise you, in the next 10 years, let's say something emerges as a better solution, the go-to for websites. It will perform like this. If it's open source, it's going to have to eat its best components, or it's going to launch with what is currently considered to be the must-have suite of stuff, which is going to include ecom. And then the templating system is also going to be built with this in mind, so that integrations can be done inside the core and not left up to the third party, to the end users. Basically, for these integrations to work at scale, and for everybody, for ecom, these integrations cannot be happening at the endpoint nodes. There will never be enough talent available. There will never be enough understanding. There will never be enough ways to get through all the entanglements that arise on these sites unless it's handled from the core. And so that's the folly of open source. It's not really a free versus paid thing. It's none of those things that we've looked at through the years that kind of trying to get a handle on this thing and figure out like what's good about it, what's not. It's not the very nature of open source. Open source itself is just a way of doing something. But we choose the remaining rules of the game. WordPress decided not to mess with the plugins or themes. It took a hands-off approach. When the reality, like I said, is they're going to have to eat the best components, subsume that functionality, and take away. The best thing they can do for end users is to remove the need to integrate at the endpoint nodes. And so that will be the future of websites. Something will emerge like I've described today, and that is going to be the future. And so what's the takeaway for you? You who has a website right now running ecom or something like this on WordPress. The takeaway for you is if you are thinking about making any sweeping changes to your site, I recommend you at least try to price it out, try to figure out what you might want to do and try to get some pricing, because I want you to be horrified. I want you to be demoralized and horrified, because that's exactly what you're going to be if you try to look around and piece anything new together. You can look at people's existing experiences with this. You can look at their sites. You can do speed tests. You can look at the whole thing. But the reality of e-commerce on every website and every platform, it sucks right now. And then a lot of people might fire back with, oh, what about Squarespace or Shopify? Well, Squarespace has dug itself into a million different holes and is not adequate for anyone who really wants to do big work. And then the more interesting one to talk about is Shopify. But everyone I know who runs a very big Shopify store, without exception, cries pain over the amount of charges that they have. They are paying a bunch of recurring subscriptions for a bunch of their components they need to run their store exactly how they want. This is another theme nobody tells you. Every little store is different. Even minor differences in the way transactions are handled necessitates big changes in the way these integrations work. Everything requires specialized treatment. Each store is different. I'm telling you right now, you may think yours is not. It's probably a little bit different. This one little thing you think, oh, it's no big deal. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. The odds of some random person you're able to hire getting this right in an integration is next to zero. Okay, so even if you think it's not a big deal, it is. It is. So there it is. So Shopify with its billions of recurring subscriptions, people are going to crumble under these prices. We are reaching a subscription event horizon as well. People are going to there's like a Dunbar's number, which is Dunbar's number suggests you can hold reasonable relationships with about 150 people, and any more than that, any people beyond the first 150, they can't really be your friends. You can't really have real relationships with these people. So it's sort of an approximation, but there's Dunbar's number. I posit that we are going to discover a similar number for the amount of monthly subscriptions people are willing to handle. I think the number's right around 15, but I think you get up in that 20, 30 range or more subscriptions that people are dealing with on a monthly basis just to keep the lights on. The fatigue is going to set in. People are going to be looking for ways to cut spending. These things are going to be looked at first because recurring expenses absolutely eat through the wallet over time. And so Shopify is on notice for this. They will probably continue to be the choice for really big retailers who have too much technical debt now, too much sunk costs to really be able to move anywhere effectively. Just their total upheaval costs and time and everything to retool a big site is brutal. And I think some of them know this. But I dislike, no matter where you are on the e-commerce spectrum right now, you are probably heading straight towards a situation that you're not going to be able to get out of at some point, or one that's going to be too expensive. It's going to be disgusting for you. You will look everywhere. You will be hoping for a good option. There will be no good options. And so I just want you to be aware of that. maybe if you already experienced some of this type of pain, I'll be speaking to that pain. But the future of these ecosystems is if it is open source, and I'm dubious there, but if it is going to be open source, it's going to be a very cannibalistic style of open source that eats its best performing subordinate components. So I hope you're ready for that reality. You know, big shifts seem to happen generationally, sort of, and a lot of times they are sort of shocking. And I think this is shocking enough to qualify. Like, this is the way it's going to be. This is not, I'm not positing here. I'm telling you, I'm reading the tea leaves. I know exactly what this says. This is the truth. Integration costs are far too high for everybody now. The new level of nuance is increasing, not decreasing. The level of nuance going up necessitates ever-increasing costs for implementation. So you see, this problem is only getting worse. It's not going to get any better. The only thing that can make it better is a core component that comes in and eats all of these fancy add-on components and then offers you, the end user, all the leverage on the efficiency and not having to do the grunt work. Okay, so there it is. Thanks for listening today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.